I didn't know black roses could mean a death sentence until the night I delivered them by mistake. The rain had been falling for hours, the kind of cold Manhattan rain that soaked through your coat, your shoes, your patience, and by 9:30 my fingers smelled like wet ribbon, flower stems, and the bitter espresso I'd spilled on myself at the shop an hour earlier. I was supposed to be done at 8. That was what my manager had promised when she slid the last order across the counter with an apologetic wince and said the driver for Uptown had called out sick. Just one more delivery, Clara. Big tip. Rich people in the city never understood that just one more thing was usually the thing that changed everything. I balanced the long black box against my hip as I hurried down the sidewalk, my sneakers splashing through shallow puddles that reflected gold streetlights and blurred taxi headlights. The card tied to the arrangement had no message inside, just an address on the Upper East Side and strict instructions in block letters. Hand deliver. No substitutions. I should have noticed how strange that was. I should have noticed the roses too. We sold dyed flowers sometimes for dramatic events, but these weren't trendy or whimsical or romantic. They were black in a way that seemed to swallow light, their petals velvety and dark as midnight water, wrapped in matte paper with a silver ribbon that looked more like a warning than decoration. By the time I reached the address, the rain had worked its way down the back of my collar, and my delivery tote felt twice as heavy as it had when I left the shop. The building didn't look like an apartment. It looked like the kind of place people whispered about without ever naming out loud. Tall wrought iron gates, limestone steps, windows glowing warm behind heavy glass. No holiday wreaths, no welcome mat, just silence, money, and the faint feeling that I had arrived somewhere I absolutely did not belong. A man in a dark coat opened the gate before I could buzz again. He didn't smile, didn't ask my name. His eyes dropped to the flowers, then lifted to my face with a look that made my stomach tighten. Delivery, I said, trying to sound casual, like women my age showed up at houses like this. Every day carrying flowers that looked like bad news. He stepped aside without a word. Inside, everything was polished stone, low lighting, and the clean scent of expensive candles trying to cover something colder underneath. My wet sneakers squeaked against marble as he led me down a hallway wider than my entire flower shop. Somewhere deeper in the house, men's voices cut through the hush, low and controlled, the kind of voices that made you instinctively lower your own. I wanted to leave the arrangement with the nearest staff member and run back into the rain, but the guard kept walking, and I kept following because that's what normal people do when they're trying not to look afraid. Then we reached a pair of open doors. The room beyond went quiet before I even stepped inside. There were 6 men in suits around a long table, all of them turning toward me at once, but I only noticed one. He stood near the far end of the room, tall and still, one hand resting lightly against the back of a chair like he owned not just the house, but the air inside it. Dark suit, dark hair, a face too calm to be called kind and too composed to be called merely handsome. His gaze landed on the black roses first, then on me, and the silence that followed felt sudden and complete, like the whole house had taken a breath and forgotten how to let it go. I swallowed hard and held out the arrangement with both hands. Delivery for. I glanced at the card, though I already knew somehow that he was the only person it could belong to. Mr. Moretti. No one moved. No one said a word. And for the first time all night, with rainwater still dripping from the hem of my coat onto his marble floor, I had the terrifying feeling that I hadn't delivered flowers. I had delivered a message. For a moment, nobody in that room seemed human. They looked like statues in expensive suits, frozen beneath the amber glow of chandelier light, all of them waiting for one man to decide what my mistake meant. Mr. Moretti did not reach for the roses right away. He just looked at them with an expression so controlled it felt colder than anger. Then his eyes lifted to mine again, and I had the absurd urge to apologize for breathing too loudly. Who sent them? He asked. His voice was low, even, and somehow that made it worse. Men who shouted could be dismissed. Men who stayed calm while an entire room held its breath were something else entirely. I glanced down at the card still tied beneath the silver ribbon. I do not know, I said. I work at Bennett and Bloom on Lexington. It was a rush order. I was just told to hand deliver it. One of the men at the table shifted in his seat. Another muttered something under his breath in Italian too quickly for me to catch. Mr. Moretti held out his hand at last, and I crossed the room before my legs could change their mind. Up close, he was even more unsettling. Not because he moved aggressively. He did not. He barely moved at all. But everything about him felt sharpened, as if his stillness cost effort and everyone else in the room knew better than to test it. I placed the black roses in his hand, careful not to brush his sleeve, and saw the tiniest change in his face when he noticed the card. Not shock. Recognition. Something quieter and far more dangerous. He untied the ribbon with deliberate fingers and opened the envelope. I watched his gaze move over the single line inside, and whatever was written there turned the air in the room heavier. He folded the card once. Then again. "Leave us," he said. Nobody argued. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Men who looked like they had never hurried for anyone moved with immediate obedience, filing out of the room one by one until only Mr. Moretti, the guard by the door, and me remained. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I am sorry," I said, because silence was suddenly unbearable. "If this was supposed to go somewhere else, I can call the shop and fix it." His mouth almost curved, but there was no warmth in it. "No, Miss Bennett," he said, glancing at the stitched logo on my damp delivery apron. It came exactly where it was meant to. The way he said my name made my skin go cold. I had not told him what it was. He must have read it from the apron, but that did not make me feel any better. If anything, it made me more aware of how closely he noticed things. He set the flowers on the table with a care that felt oddly deliberate, as though even touching them required calculation. "Do you know what black roses mean?" he asked. I shook my head. "Funerals, maybe?" That almost smile appeared again, thinner this time. "Not in my world." He stepped toward me then, just one pace, and it was enough to make the room feel smaller. "In my world, they mean someone wants to be remembered before something ends." I stared at him, not fully understanding, only knowing I had walked into something larger than a delivery. "I did not read the card," I said quickly. "I did not ask questions. I do not want trouble." His eyes stayed on mine for a long second, calm and unreadable. "That is precisely why you are in trouble," he said. The guard shifted near the door, and panic climbed into my chest so fast I could barely breathe around it. "Please," I whispered. "I was just doing my job." Something changed in his face then. Not softness. Nothing as simple as that. But a pause. A quiet recalculation. He looked at my rain-soaked coat, the stem stains on my fingers, the cheap sneakers leaving wet marks on his marble floor, and whatever he saw seemed to move him from one decision to another. "Go home, Clara," he said at last, "and do not answer your door for anyone tonight unless they say my name first." I should have run the second he said it. I should have thanked him and disappeared into the rain and never returned to that side of the city again. Instead, I stood there with my pulse hammering and my hand still curled from where I had carried those flowers, realizing that somehow his warning felt even more frightening than his silence had. I did not remember the cab ride home. One minute I was stepping back into the rain with his warning still echoing in my ears, and the next I was standing in front of my apartment building on East 91st Street with my keys in my hand, and my heart still refusing to slow down. My building looked the way it always did. Narrow brick front. Flickering hallway light behind the glass door. A dented mail slot nobody ever fixed. Normally, the sight of it would have steadied me. That night it felt fragile, like scenery in a play after you had already seen the machinery behind the curtain. I kept hearing his voice. "Go home, Clara. Do not answer your door unless they say my name first." It sounded ridiculous once I was alone. Dramatic. Impossible. The kind of thing only made sense inside a mansion full of polished marble and men in tailored suits. But my hands were still shaking when I climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, and when I got inside, I locked the deadbolt, slid the chain into place, and checked both twice. My apartment was barely 400 square feet, a studio with a radiator that hissed all winter and windows old enough to rattle every time a truck passed below, but it had always been mine. My little island of thrift store furniture and secondhand books and flowers I brought home when customers changed their minds. That night, even the familiar smell of eucalyptus and old wood could not calm me. I dropped my soaked coat over the chair by the door and pulled my phone from my bag. 3 missed calls from the shop. 1 text from my manager asking if the delivery was complete. Nothing unusual. Nothing sinister. I told myself that meant everything was fine. I typed back, delivered, heading home. Then I erased heading home before sending it. I did not know why. Maybe because suddenly it felt foolish to tell anyone where I was. Maybe because some instinct I did not trust had started making decisions before my mind could catch up. I turned on every lamp in the apartment. The overhead light in the kitchenette. The one beside my bed. Even the tiny bulb over the stove. Shadows gathered anyway. I heated canned tomato soup I did not want, then let it go cold on the counter untouched. At 10:15, a car door slammed on the street below, and I nearly dropped the spoon. At 10:20, footsteps in the hallway outside made my pulse race so hard I had to press a hand to my ribs. They passed my door. Kept going. I laughed once, softly, but there was no humor in it. I was 26 years old, afraid of my own hallway because a stranger with storm gray eyes had looked at a bouquet like it, carried a secret, and then told me to hide. Around 11, my phone buzzed again. I grabbed it too fast. Unknown number. I stared at the screen until it stopped. A second later, it lit up with a voicemail notification. I did not listen. I could not. The room had gone too quiet. Then came the knock. 3 calm, deliberate taps against the wood. Not loud. Not urgent. Somehow that made it worse. I stood frozen in the middle of my apartment, every muscle locked. Another 3 knocks. Then a man's voice from the other side. Deep and controlled. Impossible to mistake even through the door. "Clara," he said. "Open the door. It is Damien Moretti. And if I came here myself, you need to understand the night just got worse." I stood there with my hand hovering over the lock, every instinct pulling in opposite directions. "Do not open the door," one part of me whispered. Another part had already recognized the truth in his voice. Damien Moretti was not a man who needed to force an entrance if that had been his intention. Men like him did not stand in dim apartment hallways and knock twice. They sent other people. They sent consequences. My fingers shook as I slid the chain free and turned the deadbolt. The door opened 3 inches before I stopped, the habit of caution stronger than fear. He was alone. At least, he looked alone. The hallway behind him was empty except for the weak yellow light flickering above the stairs, but Damien carried the same atmosphere he had inside that mansion, as if the air around him belonged to him before anyone else had a chance to claim it. He had changed out of the suit jacket from earlier, but not the rest. Dark slacks, crisp white shirt, open at the collar now. Rain still clung to the shoulders of his black overcoat, and the sharp, clean scent of night air followed him into the doorway. In one hand, he held a small box wrapped in matte black paper. In the other, nothing. Somehow the empty hand made me more nervous. "You came here," I said, and immediately hated how breathless I sounded. His gaze flicked over my face, the chain lock hanging loose, the lamps burning in every corner behind me. "I told you not to open the door for anyone unless." "They said my name first," he said. "You listened. That is good. You still have not explained why." "Because explanation is slower than danger." His tone stayed level, but something in it made my spine go rigid. I opened the door the rest of the way without meaning to. It felt less like inviting him in and more like surrendering to the fact that the night had already crossed some invisible line. Damien stepped inside, his eyes taking in everything with one quiet sweep. My thrift store bookshelf, the chipped ceramic planter on the windowsill, the mug in the sink with dried green tea stains around the rim. Nothing in my apartment matched the world he came from, and yet he moved through it without visible judgment, which somehow unsettled me more than contempt would have. He set the small black package down on my tiny kitchen table beside the untouched soup and turned toward the window. Across the street, a dark sedan idled beneath the street lamp. I had not noticed it before. "Do you know anyone who drives that car?" he asked. I stepped beside him, careful not to get too close, and looked through the rain-blurred glass. "No, it has been there since before you came home." Cold slid through me so fast it felt physical. "You are sure?" "I do not make guesses, Clara." He drew the curtain shut with 2 fingers, calm and deliberate. "Someone wanted to know whether you would come back here alone. Now they know." I stared at him, trying to keep my breathing even. "Because of flowers?" His jaw shifted slightly at that, the first visible sign of strain I had seen from him. "Not because of flowers. Because of what those flowers meant." He tapped the black package once with his knuckles. "I did not come here to frighten you. I came because there is only one way to make certain men leave you untouched once they begin asking questions." "And what is that?" He looked at me then, fully, and whatever I expected to see in his face was not there. No cruelty, no pity, only a decision that had been made before he ever climbed my stairs. by making it clear you are no longer unclaimed. I frowned, not understanding until he slid the wrapped box across the table toward me. The paper whispered beneath his hand. "Open it," he said. I did. Inside was a velvet ring box, black as the roses had been, and when I lifted the lid, a single diamond caught the lamplight and sent it scattering across my tiny apartment like a warning dressed as something beautiful. I looked up too quickly, my pulse turning wild all over again. "This is insane." "No," Damien said quietly. "This is the first reasonable thing that has happened tonight." I stared at the ring as if it might explain itself if I looked long enough. It did not. It just sat there in the black velvet box on my scarred little kitchen table, catching the light from the lamp beside my bed and throwing it back in sharp white flashes that felt completely wrong in my apartment. Diamonds belonged in glass cases on Fifth Avenue. They did not belong next to canned soup and unpaid utility bills and a woman who still bought generic cereal because the brand name box cost $2 more. "I am not putting that on," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, and for some reason that seemed to interest Damien. He leaned one shoulder against the wall near the window, all quiet control and expensive fabric, watching me with that unreadable expression that made every word feel like part of a test. "I did not ask you to marry me," he said. "Then why bring a ring to my apartment in the middle of the night?" "Because symbols matter." He said it simply, like it should have been obvious, like the answer had been sitting there between us all along. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh, except there was nothing funny in it. "Not in my world." "That," he said softly, "is the problem." I folded my arms tight across my chest, more for comfort than defiance. "Then explain it to me." Slowly, in normal people language. For the first time, something flickered in his face that looked dangerously close to amusement, though it vanished before I could trust it. He crossed the room, not rushing, and closed the velvet box with one precise movement. "The roses you delivered were not romantic. They were not decorative. They were a message. You said that already. And I am saying it again because you still think this is absurd." He set one hand flat on the table, his knuckles inches from mine, but he did not touch me. "Black roses in my world are a declaration. A reminder. They mean a debt is being called, a line has been crossed, and someone is prepared to darken every room that matters until they get what they want." I swallowed. "And what does that have to do with me?" His eyes held mine. "You carried that declaration through my door with your own hands. You were seen. That makes you part of the message, whether you intended to be or not." The words landed harder than I wanted them to. I thought of the sedan across the street, the unknown call, the way the men in that mansion had gone still when I entered the room. "So what now?" I asked quietly. "Now the people who sent those roses will be asking whether you are insignificant or useful." "I am neither," I said. "I am a florist who took the wrong delivery. You are whatever they decide you are unless I give them a reason to decide otherwise." I looked down at the closed ring box between us. "And the ring is that reason?" "Yes. Why would anyone care if I wear it?" His face hardened, not with anger, but with certainty. "Because if they believe you belong to me, they will treat you differently." I hated the wording instantly. "Belong." I repeated. "I am not an object." "No," he said, and there was something unexpectedly sharp in his tone now, as if my accusation offended him. "You are a woman alone in a city that notices power before it notices truth. I am offering you the first one because the second will not help you tonight." The room went quiet after that. Not empty quiet, heavy quiet. The kind that settles when fear and logic begin to sound too much alike. I looked at the ring box again, then at Damien, at the man standing in my apartment like darkness had followed him there, but stopped at the line of his shoulders. "And if I say no?" I asked. He did not answer right away. He turned his head slightly toward the curtained window, listening to something I could not hear. Then he looked back at me, calm as ever, and said, "Then in the next 5 minutes, Clara, I will teach you just how little your old life can protect you." The next 5 minutes changed the shape of my life so quietly that if I had not been standing in the middle of it, I might have missed the moment everything tilted. Damien did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. He simply pulled a phone from the inside pocket of his coat, glanced once at the screen, and held it out to me. "Look." I hesitated before taking it. A grainy security image filled the display. My building entrance. Time-stamped 8 minutes earlier. A man in a dark baseball cap stood across the street beside the idling sedan, his face half turned away. The next image showed the same man speaking to someone in the passenger seat. The third showed him looking up at my windows. A cold, slow pressure spread through my chest. "Where did you get these?" I asked. "From cameras that belong to me." He took the phone back and slipped it away before I could ask what else in my life now belonged to him. "The car across the street is not there by accident. The call you did not answer was not random. Someone is confirming whether you matter." I hated how quickly my mind accepted that. I hated even more that fear had started making him sound reasonable. "This is insane," I whispered, but the words felt weak now, worn thin by evidence. Damien glanced toward the table. "So is pretending your world has not changed." I looked at the ring box again, at the clean dark lines of it, at the obscene brightness hidden inside. "And if I put it on, they just go away?" No, his honesty hit harder than comfort would have. Men like that do not go away because they are asked. They recalculate. That is enough for tonight. I wrapped my arms around myself and paced the narrow stretch between my bed and the kitchenette, for steps one direction, for steps back. My apartment had never felt this small. Every object in it suddenly seemed to belong to another woman. Someone who still believed she could solve problems with overtime hours and practical shoes, and keeping her head down. "You are asking me to become part of something I do not understand," I said. "I am asking you to survive long enough to understand it later." I stopped pacing and faced him. "And what happens after tonight? Tomorrow, you go to work. You expect me to arrange hydrangeas like nothing happened?" "No," he said. "I expect you to act exactly as you normally would while I make certain nothing touches you." The certainty in his voice should have calmed me. Instead, it unsettled me in an entirely new way. Nobody had ever spoken about protecting me as if it were already decided. There was something deeply unfair about how safe that sounded. "Why do you care?" I asked before I could stop myself. "You do not know me." For the first time since he arrived, Damien went still in a way that felt different from before, less like control and more like memory. "I care because this began at my door," he said, "and because I do not leave innocent people inside consequences that belong to me." Innocent. The word should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel fragile, like glass someone richer and stronger had chosen not to break. Outside, a car horn sounded somewhere down the block. I flinched before I could hide it. Damien saw. Of course he saw. He reached for the ring box and opened it again, the diamond catching the light in one sharp pulse. Then he held it out, not commanding this time, not pushing, simply waiting with the patience of a man and used to hearing no but willing, for one strange moment, to let the choice be mine. My hand stayed at my side. "If I do this," I said carefully, "it does not mean I am yours." His eyes lifted to mine, calm and direct. "No, Clara. It means the city thinks you are." I should have refused again. I should have held on to the last thin piece of my old life and called it dignity. Instead, with my pulse unsteady and the rain whispering against the window like the night was listening, I held out my hand. Damien took it gently, far more gently than a man like him had any right to be, and slid the ring onto my finger as if it had already been measured for me. Then his thumb brushed once across my knuckles, almost absent-mindedly, and he looked toward the door with sudden focus. "Do not move," he said quietly, "because whoever is outside your apartment just stopped pretending not to be there." The knock came softly, not the frantic pounding of someone lost, not the careless rap of a neighbor with a package. 3 measured taps, spaced just far enough apart to sound intentional, and every muscle in my body locked beneath Damien's hand. He had already released me, but the warmth of his touch still lingered around my knuckles, strange and impossible against the cold rush climbing my spine. Another 3 knocks, then silence, the kind that makes you hear everything else too clearly. The radiator hiss, the rain against the old window glass, my own breathing, too fast and too shallow. Damien did not look at me. His gaze stayed fixed on the door, his whole body gone still in that unnerving way of his, as if stillness itself were a weapon he had perfected. "Stay behind me," he said. His voice was low enough that it barely disturbed the air. I should have argued. It was my apartment, my door, my life being rearranged by forces I had never asked to meet. But fear had already burned through pride, leaving only instinct, and instinct told me that if Damien Moretti sounded that calm, then whatever stood on the other side of the door was not there by accident. He crossed the room without hurry, but there was nothing casual in the way he moved. He reached the door and paused, one hand braced against the frame, the other sliding into the inside pocket of his coat. I did not see what he touched there. I only saw the slight shift in his shoulders, the way his head tilted as if listening for breath beyond the wood. "Who is it?" he asked. No answer. The silence stretched long enough to make my pulse pound harder. Then footsteps retreated down the hall. Slow, unhurried, deliberate enough to let us know whoever had been there wanted us to hear them leave. Damien waited another beat before unlocking the door and pulling it open in one sharp motion. The hallway beyond was empty. The weak ceiling light buzzed overhead. Shadows pooled near the stairwell. Nothing moved. Nothing, except a single black envelope resting on the worn welcome mat I had bought for $3 at a discount store last spring. Damien bent, lifted it, and shut the door again. I stared at the envelope in his hand and felt my stomach turn. There was no stamp. No address. Just my name written across the front in elegant silver ink. Clara. No last name. No mistake. Damien slid one finger beneath the seal and opened it with maddening care. Inside was a card the size of a business note, thick black paper with one sentence embossed in the same silver script. "You should not wear another man's promise unless you are ready to keep it." I did not realize I was holding my breath until it hurt. "What does that mean?" I whispered. Damien's expression did not change, but something colder entered the room all the same. "It means they saw the ring go on." I looked down at my hand so fast the diamond caught the light again, bright and hard and suddenly unbearable. "From where?" "That is what I intend to find out." His tone was flat now, stripped of even the faint traces of patience he had shown me before. He took out his phone and typed one brief message, his thumb precise and economical, then slid the device away. "You have 10 minutes, he said. "For what?" "To pack a bag." My head snapped up. No. The refusal came instantly, louder than anything I had said all night. "I am not leaving with you because of a note and a car across the street and flowers I never should have delivered in the first place." Damien stepped closer then, not enough to crowd me, just enough to make sure I heard every word. "Clara, someone washed your building, approached your door, and left a message addressed to you within minutes of that ring touching your hand. Whatever this was when you stepped into my house, it is no longer small. And if they are bold enough to come to your door tonight, then tomorrow they will be bolder." My throat tightened. "I have work tomorrow." It was the weakest argument in history, and we both knew it. His gaze did not soften, but it sharpened into something almost like resolve. "Then I will make sure you get there from somewhere safer." I looked around my apartment, at the bed with the faded quilt my aunt had mailed me from Ohio, at the row of chipped ceramic pots on the windowsill, at the life that had fit neatly inside these four walls until a few hours ago. Then I looked back at Damien, at the man who had brought a ring like armor and now stood in my kitchen holding a threat written in silver ink. "Where exactly," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, "is safer than this?" His eyes held mine for one long second before he answered. "With me." I should have said no. I should have clung to the last scraps of normalcy with both hands and told Damien Moretti to take his warnings, his ring, and his impossible certainty back to whatever polished dark world he had come from. But the note was still on my table. My name was still written across it in silver ink that looked too elegant for a threat and too deliberate to dismiss. And the diamond on my hand felt heavier with every second, not because of its size, but because somewhere out there, someone had already noticed it. 10 minutes, Damien repeated, and this time there was no room in his voice for argument. I looked at my apartment one more time, trying to memorize it in case the life waiting for me when I came back was not the same one I had left. Then I turned, crossed to my dresser, and pulled out the old canvas overnight bag I used when I visited my aunt in Jersey. My hands shook as I packed. Jeans, sweater, toothbrush, phone charger, the blue scarf my mother had bought me at a street market in Boston when I was 17 and convinced winter in New York would somehow feel romantic. It did not. None of this did. Damien moved through the apartment while I packed, not touching anything, just checking the locks, the windows, the hallway beyond the peephole. He made one quiet phone call in Italian, too low for me to catch more than a few clipped syllables, and whatever answer he received seemed to harden something in his face. "What happened?" I asked. He slid the phone back into his coat. "The sedan is gone." That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made my stomach drop. "Gone where?" away from where I can see it. I zipped the bag shut harder than necessary. You really know how to reassure people. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile. Reassurance is a luxury tonight. He took the bag from my hand before I could protest and held out my coat. The gesture was so ordinary it almost undid me. No threats, no drama, just a man helping me into a rain-damp coat while the whole axis of my life slid quietly off-center. I slipped my arms into the sleeves and looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close he stood, of the clean scent of cedar and cold night clinging to his overcoat, of how impossible it was that a stranger had become the only steady thing in the room. "If I leave with you," I said, keeping my voice low, "this does not mean I trust you." Damien met my gaze without blinking. "I know. Then why do you look so certain?" "Because trust is not the first thing I need from you." He opened the apartment door, checked the hallway once, then stepped aside to let me out first. I hesitated on the threshold. My apartment behind me was warm, cluttered, familiar. The hallway beyond was dim and smelled faintly of bleach and old plaster. It should have been an easy choice. It did not feel like one. Then I saw it. Taped to the wall opposite my door, half hidden beside the fire extinguisher case, was a single black rose. Fresh. Perfect. Waiting. My breath caught so sharply it hurt. Damien saw it at the same moment I did. The stillness that came over him then was worse than anger, worse than fear, because it meant something had changed in a way even he had not expected. He crossed the hall, removed the rose with one smooth motion, and turned it once between his fingers. A silver pin had been pushed through the stem. Tiny, thin, almost invisible. He looked at it for half a second before his jaw tightened. "We are leaving now," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just with a finality that made the hallway feel instantly dangerous. "What is that?" I whispered. He slipped the pin into his coat pocket and took my elbow, firm but careful, guiding me toward the stairs. "A message," he said. We moved quickly down the narrow staircase, my sneakers slipping once on the wet tile in the lobby, Damien steadying me before I could stumble. Outside, the rain had eased to a mist that silvered the streetlights and blurred the edges of everything. A black car waited at the curb, engine running, one of his men already holding the rear door open. I glanced back at my building just once. Third-floor light still on, curtains slightly crooked from where Damien had closed it. The last visible piece of my ordinary life. Then I ducked into the car, and Damien followed me inside. The door shut with a quiet, expensive sound, sealing out the rain, the street, and whatever had been watching from the shadows. Only when the sedan pulled away did Damien reach into his coat, take out the silver pin, and turn it in the dim light between us. My blood went cold when I saw the symbol engraved on its head. A tiny crown made of thorns. Damien's expression did not change, but his voice dropped into something I had not heard from him before, something darker and far more personal. "They should not have used that crest," he said. "Not if they wanted this to remain business." The city looked different from inside Damien Moretti's car. New York had always been noise to me. Steam rising from subway grates. Sirens in the distance. Taxi horns ricocheting between buildings. But from the back seat of that black sedan, with rain threading silver across the windows and a diamond ring still cold on my hand, the city felt quieter, sharper, like someone had peeled away the familiar layer and shown me the steel underneath. Damien sat beside me, one hand resting near the silver pin in his lap, his gaze fixed on the blur of streets passing outside. The driver said nothing. The man in the front passenger seat said nothing. Even silence seemed to work for him. I could still see the crest in my mind. That tiny thorn-crowned symbol engraved into the pin as if it belonged there, as if whoever had left it outside my apartment wanted to be recognized. "What is it?" I asked finally. My voice sounded small against the hush inside the car. Damien did not answer right away. He turned the pin once between his fingers, watching the light catch the metal. "A family mark," he said at last. "An old one. Older than most of the men who use it now are wise enough to understand." "And why did that change things?" He looked at me then, really looked, and whatever he saw on my face must have convinced him not to soften the truth. "Because black roses can be a warning. A sedan outside your building can be surveillance. A note on your doorstep can be intimidation. Those are tactics." His thumb stilled over the pin. "That crest is history. It means this did not begin tonight." A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with the weather. "You think this was planned?" I know it was. I looked down at my hand, at the ring gleaming in the dim light like a choice I had made too quickly and yet somehow too late. Then why me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. I do not know. His honesty should not have comforted me, but it did. Slightly. I know the message was meant for me. I know someone wanted to test how quickly I would react. I know they expected fear. His gaze dropped briefly to the ring. They did not expect me to place my protection on you publicly. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Publicly? Damien, I put on a ring in my kitchen. There were no cameras, no reporters, no giant dramatic announcement. There did not need to be. There was that faint, almost smile again, gone as soon as it appeared. In my world, news moves faster than headlines. The sedan turned through a set of iron gates that opened before we reached them. Beyond them stood the same limestone mansion from earlier, its windows lit gold against the rain-dark night. But from this side of the threshold it felt different. Less like a destination. More like a line I would not easily cross back over. The car rolled to a stop beneath the awning, and one of his men opened my door before I could reach for the handle. I stepped out slowly, overnight bag in one hand, my other hand still unconsciously curled around the ring. The stone steps glistened with rain. Somewhere above us, wind moved through bare branches with a dry whisper. Damien came around the car and stopped beside me, close enough that I could feel the steadiness of him without his touching me. You will stay here tonight, he said. Not a question, not quite an order either. Something heavier than both. I looked up at the mansion, then back at him. And tomorrow? His eyes held mine in the low light, storm gray, and impossible to read completely. Tomorrow, he said, I find out who put a crown of thorns on your door. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was. But standing there beneath the rain and the awning and the strange protection of a man I should never have met, I felt something else moving beneath the fear now. Not trust. Not yet. Something more dangerous. The beginning of belief. Because for the first time all night, I understood what the ring actually was. Not a proposal. Not ownership. A line drawn in the dark. And as Damien lifted one hand and brushed a strand of rain-damp hair back from my face with a gentleness that completely undid me, he said the words that made the whole night settle into something irreversible. If darkness came for you through me, Clara, then I will be the one it learns to fear.